I think I need to revitalise this channel. We need a co-presenter. Picture this, Sydney Sweeney in a bikini, sitting on my lap, stroking my hand to help me through my anxiety. That would get me so many views and the channel would go viral. Sorry, you're just going to have to put up with me for now. Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I am Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends, wives, and especially your boyfriends and your husbands. A very warm welcome to yet another DCU Daily, and a very warm welcome to Thursday's edition of the DCU Daily. You can follow me on X Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad. X on Snapchat, BMouth60, and on TikTok, Mad Mickey's World. So, let's talk about Superman and modernising this character. 3 modern day attempts to modernise and revitalise Superman in film have pretty much crashed and burned. Superman Returns was supposed to be a continuation of the Reeves-Donnerverse. It was a flop. Man of Steel divided audiences. I love Superman Returns and I love Man of Steel, but Man of Steel divided audiences. And then there's this latest attempt from James Gunn, in my humble opinion, the worst Superman film ever made. It's worse than Superman 3, actually a film I think is quite pioneering. You think about the little green man and little red man fighting. Pioneering effect, by the way. Superman and Clark fighting in that sequence is amazing. And Superman 4 is a lot of fun despite the budgetary problems that film actually had. So, you know what? When I think about modernising a pre-existing character, I think Doctor Who did it the best. You think about Paul McGann in Doctor Who the movie. The movie's not very popular with die-hard Doctor Who fans, but everyone loves Paul as the Doctor. You think of Christopher Eccleston. You think of David Tennant, Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi. What did all those versions have in common? They were young, they were, youthful, they had exuberance, they had je ne sais quoi. They were great modern versions of the character, but one thing all those versions have in common, they were absolutely the Doctor, the biggest personality in the room, the most intelligent personality in the room, absolutely still the Doctor. And this is the problem that they found, what Hollywood have found in modernising Superman. Now, Brandon Routh's version is supposed to be Christopher Reeve, but when you look at Henry Cavill and when you look at David Corenswet's Superman and Clark Kent, they try and change who the character is. They make interestingly different types of films. Man of Steel is very post 9/11, very contemporary, a very risque way of making a Superman film. I love Man of Steel, as I said earlier, but it's risky and die-hard fans didn't like it. And this latest attempt to make a Superman movie, I don't know what else I can say about this movie. Making him a beta bitch, making him a whiner, a crier, someone who's getting beaten up, in an effort to make him more relatable, is so lazy, as I've said so many times. And it's my worst live-action version of Superman. And this is, look, as I've said before, there's a responsibility about modernising pre-existing iconic characters. These are the reasons that Superman and its modernisations in movie form haven't been very, very successful. They divided audiences. But what's interesting, and as I've always said, and so many times I've said before, is that the modernisations of Superman have been more successful in television than in film. Because with all the pissing contest between Snyder stands and gun bros about who's made the bigger box office, Man of Steel or Superman, in fact, it's Superman 78 and Smallville that have made more dough. And believe you me, I've calculated it. You know, and it's very interesting. But even when you look at Superman and Lois, a perfect reinterpretation of Superman. You make him a family man. You give him emotional challenges in terms of his two sons and his wife, Lois Lane, and it works. And you don't make him a beta, you don't make him a whiner. He's still a great version of that character. So the two modernizations of Superman that have actually worked is Smallville and Superman and Lois. And they've worked for more people than Superman Returns, Man of Steel, and Gunn's awful Superman movie have at all. And a lot of people will be shouting at their monitors, their phones, their devices, whatever, while I'm talking. I don't really care, I'm not intimidated by anyone. These are facts. Because as I say, when you're modernizing a pre-existing iconic character, you can modernize them. I want that modernization. I want, a modern day kind of youthful actor to be there. But I still, there's no point calling a character Superman if he isn't Superman. I like Brandon Routh as Clark and Superman, but there is something missing. There isn't that Christopher Reeve screen presence. Henry Cavill, I like him as Clark and Superman, but again, there's something missing. And there's absolutely something missing with David Corenswet's version as well. I mean, I think he's a better Clark Kent than he is a Superman. If you remember rightly, one of the first things I said in my early reaction to Superman was the biggest problem about this film was Superman himself. And you cannot have you can't make Superman the problem. If Superman's the problem in your movie, you're fucked. Amazingly, Superman's made over $500 million. I think that's amazing considering what trash that movie actually is. Making him being rescued all the time, etc., etc., making him a weakling. It is a pathetic, modern-day, woke attempt at making a Superman film. Why even fucking call him Superman at this point? Ironically, taking Superman out of the costume, as Smallville did, was a great reinterpretation of the character. Alfred Goff and Miles Miller, the creators of Smallville, said no flights, no tights. They took him out of the costume because at the time, superheroes weren't cool and they were quite passé, if you like. But what they did is take him out of the costume and made him Peter Parker. They made him a human being, a teenager who was accessible to other teenagers with teenage problems, using the fact that he's developing X-ray vision and heat vision and making it relatable to having growing pains was fucking genius by Goff and Miller. And they're doing it again with Wednesday. These guys are geniuses. They found a way to modernize Superman for a modern audience and bring a new generation along for the ride. This is exactly what Russell T Davies did with Doctor Who. And, it was genius. And this is what George Lucas did with Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Cast Jake Lloyd as a very young 10-year-old Anakin Skywalker. He's relatable to young boys and young girls. And all of a sudden, a new generation of Star Wars fans, a new generation of Superman fans, a new generation of Doctor Who fans was born. This hasn't happened with Superman Returns. It's kind of happened slightly with Cavill's Superman, but not to the extent that you would want. You see, the Superman I grew up with, Christopher Reeve, he has screen presence. He feels like Superman. He looks like Superman. He acts like Superman because Donna isn't attempting to change who Superman is, and that's the success of it. But everything about it is absolutely perfect, whether you think it's dated, because Superman's too, nice, or whatever you fucking think of the Christopher Reeve version. I mean, I can't believe the other day someone tried to gaslight someone who loved Christopher Reeve's version by having an interview with Margot Kidder complaining that basically, Reeve wanted a new love interest for Superman 4, which was wrong, and he was trying to say that Margot Kidder was too old to be the love interest and all of that, and that was wrong. But I don't care if Christopher Reeve was a good guy or a bad guy. I think he was a good guy. But if he was a bad guy, it doesn't matter. All that matters was that he's the best Superman there ever was. And the first Superman film he made is the best Superman movie. And I think the next best Superman movie has to be Man of Steel. And I appreciate that film for everything it is. But that's not the point. As I say, there's a great responsibility in reinterpreting, iconic characters from modern age. And as I say, Smallville, Doctor Who, Superman and Lois did this really, really successfully. And as I said, The Phantom Menace. Smallville is very, very interesting. Tom Welling acts like you'd expect a teenage Clark Kent to act. Michael Rosenbaum acts like a 20-something Lex Luthor. I remember seeing going, bloody hell, the guy's bald, he looks like Lex Luthor. He can't, in my perception, he's acting how a 20-something Lex Luthor should act. It's a perfect adaptation and it's fascinating because you've got them as friends. They change things up, a little bit. The concept is fresh, but it's still that world. It still makes sense. And it's kind of this foreshadowing of what Superman and Lex are going to become. It's a genius model to adapt a pre-existing character. And Superman Returns, unfortunately, just had too many pacing issues, and it just didn't feel like it was Christopher Reeve's world, because that's the Superman he was supposed to be. And Man of Steel was such a different, swing at making a Superman film. You either love it or you hate it. And there lies the problem. Where when you look at Smallville, when you look at Superman and Lois, what it does is say, this guy's powerful, this guy has powers, he's a hero, but he has emotional challenges. And that's very, very important for an adaptation. So I think this is where the three movies have gone wrong, and where Superman and Lois and Smallville got it absolutely right. And I've said this before, it's the emotional challenges that Clark has that make him relatable. And Gunn's lazy, creatively bankrupt idea of making this guy relatable by having him a beta, having him weak, having to be rescued all the time, is laziness. It's laziness of the highest kind. It's crazy to me. And, I rewatch Smallville all the time. We're seeing a boy's journey into becoming a man. And it's such a beautiful thing to watch. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating. And there's no question, if there's one interpretation that got this character bang on, it's Smallville. And it's Tom Welling's version of this character. I've written 5 seasons of a Metropolis spin-off. I think it would be amazing. I would love to see Tom Welling play a Superman in his 50s. But what I'm concerned with now is that we may not see Superman again for a very long time. I don't know what's going to happen here. Are they really looking at this film as a success? Will we see more Superman? According to Gunn, we're going to see a lot more Superman in the DCU. That's if there is a Superman going forward. And, this is the problem. The reimaginations of Superman on film haven't worked for everyone. Whether it's Superman Returns, Man of Steel, or Gunn's Abomination. And let's be absolutely clear, the movie is an abomination. To me, it's a fucking parody. When I watched it, it felt like a parody version of Superman. So Hollywood have made mistakes when it comes to modernizing Superman, but television have really got that character right. What the TV shows have proven is you can modernize Superman for a modern audience. You can make him relatable, and you can have a huge audience tuning in from week to week. Because let's make no mistake, a huge audience were tuning into Smallville for a decade. They were interested in that character. They were interested for 7 seasons in his relationship with Lex Luthor and Clark Kent going forward to becoming Superman. It was amazing and people were invested. So Superman is relatable when you get that interpretation and modernization right.